people like Russell Moore and David French and others would kind of think abortion is a nuanced issue. Marriage is a nuanced issue. In fact, of course, David French came out for same-sex marriage, and he's supposed to be a Christian, right? But somehow vaccines, the Bible speaks clearly on it. If you don't get a vaccine, you're not loving your neighbor.
Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to the Alisa Childers podcast, where it's always my goal to help equip Christians to identify the core beliefs of historic Christianity, discern its counterfeits, and proclaim the gospel with clarity, kindness, and with truth. And today's episode is very special to me because it features my ministry partner, colleague, and good friend, Frank Turek. Many of my longtime listeners, you already know about Frank. You've actually been praying for Frank, but the whole world knows who Frank Turek is now because of his involvement with Charlie Kirk and the events of the last couple of weeks. We're going to talk about all of that in a moment, but we're really here to talk about a children's book that Frank has just written with Brave Books, who, by the way, is the sponsor of today's podcast. So it's brought to you by Brave Books, which is a Christian children's entertainment company. And you can go to bravebooks.com/childers for 20% off your order. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in a moment. But today's episode, like I said, is very special. If you're not familiar or aware, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Frank was with him, and even with him in the van on the way to the hospital trying to resuscitate him, and spoke at his memorial, or I should say preached the gospel at his memorial, and has been preaching the gospel all over secular media, news outlets. And so when he came on the show today, we just got off our call, and I wanted to know, how is he processing all of this? How is he doing? How can we be praying for him? So we asked all of those kinds of questions. What are we thinking about as we see narratives emerge on social media? And one of the things that we talked quite a bit about in today's episode is this idea that some people are concerned about. They're saying, isn't this what we're calling revival, this beautiful thing we're seeing God doing where he's drawing people to himself? We're seeing record numbers in our churches, people being curious about Jesus. Is that just another social gospel? Is it a political gospel? And so we spent some time on that question. We also spent a little bit of time, because Frank is so good on this topic, of what is the Christian's responsibility when we're engaging politically? Because as we'll talk about on the show, there's this engagement strategy that's being called third wayism, which has convinced a lot of Christians to be really silent on political topics, which I really think has led to the church failing to be salt and light in certain areas. And then we see kind of a lot of darkness in our culture. And so we talked about that on this episode, or I think we talked about, it might have been on Frank's podcast. I don't know. I've done so many podcasts this week. I honestly can't remember what I've talked about and what I haven't talked about. But we also talked about that idea, like, is this just a political gospel? And I think what I might just summarize for you is that when you think about the social gospel, it's right to point out that that's wrong, right? In the late 1800s, early 1900s, Christians decided to put aside doctrine, to put aside the sin and redemption story of the gospel message, and focus on government programs, on the physical needs of people in the here and the now. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem, actually, in progressive Christianity as well. And so the question is this a political revival? And so I want to just say, first of all, without equivocation, politics is not going to save us. That's not what we're looking to for salvation. But there is a biblically responsible way that Christians should engage in politics in their culture. And it's not the social gospel because, as we've seen, the real gospel is being preached, and it was preached at the memorial, for example. And so there is a political element, though. So leftist politics, big government, that's going to lead you directly to the social gospel, because then people start relying on government to do everything. Whereas conservative politics, when argued correctly, is going to lead to liberty. It's going to lead to personal responsibility and order, and maybe lead toward biblical values that could be an open door eventually to the gospel. So I'm not concerned that what we're seeing is a political or a social gospel. With that said, there will be bad actors that will seek to co-opt it for their political political means that want that political power. And our job as Christians is just to make sure our priorities are straight, to keep the gospel front and center, and then engage responsibly with our politics. We cover all of that today. Plus, we talk about this great children's book and a subscription service that you can subscribe to on Brave Books for your young kids. So right before we get to that, though, I want to let you know that we are bringing our Unshaken conferences for 2 more events this year. We're going to be in Southern California in San Clemente on October 25th, and we're going to be in Dallas, Texas on November 8th. Guys, this Unshaken conference is a conference that I have done 10 dates already with Natasha Crane and Frank Turek. And really our goal is to help the church talk about issues that they maybe have been shy to talk about. Things like transgender ideology, abortion, social justice. We're going to be talking about sexuality, all sorts of stuff. And ultimately, it's our goal to help equip the church to have these kinds of conversations from a biblical perspective. And we are really fired up and pumped up for our Unshaken conferences, especially in light of the cultural moment that we're in right now. So if you can get to Southern California or to Dallas, we would love to have you join us. You can go to unshakenconference.com to get your tickets there. And I also want to let you know that I have a student version of my book, Another Gospel, coming out on October 21st. If you read my first book, Another Gospel, you know that this was like a theological memoir. It was a story of me almost losing my faith close to 15 years ago as a result of being deconstructed, essentially, by a progressive Christian pastor. And I walked the reader through that journey. And then along the way, we address the claims of progressive Christianity. So we wanted to come out with a student edition to be able to give high school and young college-age students a resource that would really help them to be able to spot progressive Christianity and be able to have a biblical answer for it. Because the way progressive Christianity works is it doesn't show up on your doorstep and announce itself. It doesn't say, hey, we're progressive Christians and we'd like to convert you. Progressive Christians don't tend to plant their own churches. They take over churches. They infiltrate churches. And so it's incredibly important that we are able to biblically be discerning enough to be able to spot the drift when it starts. And so that's what I really hope this book will do for students. We're going to be also coming out with an audio version of that book that I'm recording right now. And I really want to get that into your hands. So go to anywhere you buy your books. Mardel.com is offering a discount on the pre-order. If you pre-order now, it really, really helps us out. And then one final thing I'll say, and then we'll go to our conversation with Frank, is that I so appreciate so many of you who have left reviews of this podcast on all of the audio platforms like Google or Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you listen to this. It helps us out so much if you go and leave a good review. And also if you share this with your friends. And I so appreciate that. And without any further ado, I guess we'll go to Frank Turek. Well, Frank, this was scheduled before the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I'll be honest with you, part of me was thinking, should we just cancel? I mean, maybe this isn't the time to talk about a children's book that you've written, but then I started to think more about it. And I thought, no, this is exactly the time to talk about a children's book because we have to teach our children good biblical virtues and values, and we have to teach them to spot the lies that have infected our country. And you have done such a great job at that. It's really an honor to have you on the show. So thanks for joining. Let me start by asking you, how are you doing? You have already done a bunch of content sharing your experience of being right there with Charlie when he was martyred. You were in the van with him on the way to the hospital. You've been preaching the gospel all over mainstream media outlets. And how you doing?
Well, I think being busy's been helpful, actually. We had 4 dates scheduled right after Charlie's assassination. And providentially, we were going to do If God, Why Evil at Western Carolina University a week after he was assassinated. So we just went through that and we said it's in honor of Charlie Kirk. And then we had 3 last week. And look, Charlie would want us to keep going. He wouldn't want us to pull back, especially when people's hearts are tender. And if Charlie were to come on right now and we were to say, Charlie, would you sacrifice your life right now to bring millions of people to Christ? He wouldn't hesitate at all, other than for Erica and the kids, right? He would say, well, that's what my life's all about anyway. Right. Why wouldn't I want to do that?
Right.
That's what I'm trying to do right now.
And he understood the risk too. I remember you saying that
sure.
when you guys were driving in, they had a drone out assessing the crowds that were building, and you said you didn't like the way it looked.
Yeah, I said, Charlie, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings. And he just kind of shrugged it off. I mean, there had to be 6,000 people there, if not more. And he didn't want to disappoint them. So, and I'm going to talk about later. Well, I can say it now, but hopefully more details are going to come out later, that his security team only had jurisdiction around him. The university police or other police were supposed to cover the roofs. I mean, this is Butler, PA all over again.
Wow.
Right. You idiots.
You'd think we'd learn.
Yeah. Why weren't you up there?
Yeah.
So
that's, you're going to be talking about that on a podcast here pretty soon,
hopefully.
I think.
We're that's all I can say right now.
Sure.
And by the way, we have proof of that. That's not speculation.
So people can tune into the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast, which right now, as we speak, Frank, it's been teetering between number 3 and number 5 on the all religion charts, which is so thrilling for me to see. That's not to, puff you up, of course, but it's to say, look, I'm so thrilled and thankful to see your message get out to a lot more people. And I'm sorry that you've had to go through what you've had to go through for that to happen. But it's truly my thought, Frank, that, God in his sovereignty had you there. And as hard as it's been, I'm just very thankful to you for your continually faithful voice, always bringing everything back to the gospel. What motivates you when you're invited to go on some media show, Fox and Friends in the morning, whatever it might be? I've noticed that somebody will ask a question about Charlie. They'll ask a question about that day, and within 10 seconds, you're in the gospel. Is that intentional?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's what I wanted. That would be what Charlie would want me to do. That would be obviously what Jesus would want us to do. The Apostle Paul would want us to do. Get people to the gospel. In fact, Paul was on his way to Rome to go before Caesar. What do you think he was going to do before Caesar? Preach the gospel, right? Yeah. He wanted to affect the Roman Empire with the gospel. So that's our goal. I mean, that's what Franklin Graham does, right? Whenever you see Franklin Graham on TV, they could ask him about his new airplane. You go, yeah, but that airplane's taking us to preach the gospel. And let me tell you about the gospel. I mean,
yeah.
So when you get this opportunity on TV, and I've had, I don't know, half a dozen or more interviews on Fox News to do that, or other Newsmax and some other ones. That's what I want to do. That's what I wanted to do at the memorial. I wanted to somehow, in 4 or 5 minutes, honor Charlie and at the same time talk about the gospel. So I said, here's all these nice things Charlie did, but that's not why he's in heaven. The reason he's in heaven is because his Savior died for him, not because he died for a Savior. So that's what we all should want to do. That's the most important message we could get out. That's why you and I do what we do. That's why Natasha does what she does,
It's exactly why. I remember you brought up Franklin Graham. I've been out to the Cove a couple of times to do some training with staff, and I'll never forget my first time at the Cove. They said, well, Franklin's going to be coming in at some point, so you'll have to just stop what you're doing. So I was literally in the middle of a presentation, and Franklin Graham comes up, and he was so friendly and everything, but he just literally got up in front of his own staff. These are all Christians. And he says, the gospel of Jesus Christ is, and then he just tells his staff the gospel. And I remember thinking, I like this. Because we need to be preaching the gospel to ourselves every day, because as we've seen, Frank, with the influx of third wayism, which I just did a podcast this week about third wayism with John Root, with the influx of third wayism, which really has been a push to get Christians to be silent about politics. I think it's been actually very effective. And with that push, we need to remember that this is all about the gospel, and the gospel will touch every area of our lives, including our politics. I know that you have been particularly, we're going to talk about the children's book, I promise, but I know that you have been very passionate about politics. And I think more than ever, the church is kind of waking up to why it's important to be biblically clear when it comes to politics. So what I would love to ask you is, let's say there's a pastor who would say, well, we don't talk about politics from the pulpit. What would be your response to try to persuade them that that's not really even a biblical way to approach shepherding their people?
Yeah, exactly. There were a number of things I would say to them. I would say, if you think the gospel is important as I do, then you better think politics are important, because politics affects your ability to preach and live the gospel. If you don't think so, go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran, I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've been to China. You can't legally set up the church, certainly not in Iran or Saudi Arabia, like you have here in America. Why? Because politically they've ruled it out. In China, they will crush the evangelical church. So politics, if for no other reason you have to be involved, you have to be involved to protect your ability to preach and live the gospel. Charlie used to say it this way: politics is not our first responsibility, but it's something that affects our first responsibility. So you have to be engaged. Our friend Josh Howerton puts it this way. He says, politics affects policy and policy affects people, and we're to care about people. If we're going to love our neighbors and ensure that the government protects innocent people from evil, which is the number one rule of government or responsibility of government, if that's what the government's supposed to do, and it is, and we have the ability to affect our government, we would be negligent if we didn't use our ability to influence our government for good. Why wouldn't we do that? Are we just supposed to allow the atheists to run the country? Where does that come from? That doesn't make any sense at all. We have to be engaged because we love people. We're supposed to be salt and light. Jesus said, occupy till I come. Jesus said, love your neighbor. How do you love your neighbor in politics? You ensure that laws are put into place that protect them from evil. And it was James Madison who said it so well in Federalist 51. He's really the father of our Constitution in terms of the Bill of Rights. He said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Would we need a government if we were all angels and we always acted rightly all the time? No, we wouldn't need a government at all. The reason we need a government is because we are fallen, we are sinful. And so we need an authority, as Romans 13 puts it, an authority who can use the sword to punish wrongdoers and protect innocent people from evil. And Christians ought to be engaged in selecting those people, or actually being those people. And the whole separation of church and state nonsense is just that. It's nonsense. What it means is that the government of the church ought not be the government of the country. In other words, the Pope ought not be the president. Okay, we get that. We're not after that. But we want Christians to be engaged in government and maybe be Caesar without imposing a particular religion, without saying you have to be a Christian in order to be a member of this society. We don't want to impose religion. We do want to impose morality, and that's what all laws do.
Right.
Every law is trying to impose morality. So we have to impose morality, but we can impose morality without saying you got to be a member of this denomination or this particular church. You can be an atheist and be in this country, but we're still going to say you ought not murder people. You ought not mutilate children. You ought not rape. You ought not steal. We're still going to say all that stuff because that's what governments are supposed to do. And Christians ought to be involved in selecting the people that do that.
One of the things that I love about Good Ranchers is that they make it so easy to put dinner on the table for my family. There are a lot of areas in my parenting where I don't get things exactly right, but one of the things that I have determined in my heart to do is to get my family around the table as often as possible. And Good Ranchers makes that so easy because I have their better than organic chicken, their grass-fed beef ready to go in my freezer, so I don't have to think about it. I don't have to go to the store. I can just make a simple meal for my family. And right now they're having their Back to the Table campaign where they're challenging families everywhere to get back to the table at least once a week, every week between now and Thanksgiving. So they're doing weekly giveaways for a free holiday ham to encourage people to gather and connect around the table. So to enter to win, all you have to do is share a photo of your gathering every Thursday night on your Instagram story. Use the hashtag Back to the Table and tag Good Ranchers. And if gathering once a week feels impossible right now, that's where Good Ranchers can help. You can get their meat delivered to your door. It's high quality, 100% American raised, harvested. So good. So go to goodranchers.com today and you're going to get $40 off with my code Alisa when you subscribe, plus a free meat add-on for the life of your subscription. Go to goodranchers.com, use my code Alisa for that $40 off and free meat for life. And don't forget to share a picture of your weekly gathering on Instagram. And let's do this. Let's get our families around the table. Goodranchers.com. Use my code Alisa. You know, it's a very interesting story in the scriptures to me is John the Baptist, who was sitting in Herod's prison because he told Herod his marriage was unlawful. A
That's
lot of,
right.
and we don't question that he was a Christian martyr, right? We have John the Baptist who got beheaded, who was sitting in Herod's prison cell because he said it is not lawful for you to have her. He was speaking out on what many pastors today would say, oh, that's political, or oh, that's a social issue that we ought, we can agree to disagree about that stuff. I mean, that's what got John the Baptist beheaded, is that it was not lawful for Herod to have the wife that he had. So I want to talk about a couple of very common pushbacks that I'm seeing right now. And maybe some of this is coming from a genuine place of concern, Christians who are concerned about gospel fidelity, and I'm sympathetic to that because I understand. But recently, a very influential person in the publishing industry went on a 2-week tirade about you, Frank, and me, and our friend Natasha, and Megan Basham, and some others, saying and claiming that we are simply preaching a social gospel by trying to make society behave itself. We're trying to use politics to make culture be good for culture's sake. And I would just love to get your response to that.
Yeah, why shouldn't we want to do that? Why shouldn't we want people to treat one another well? And why shouldn't we want to use the government to restrain evil? That's what governments are supposed to do. Now, I think if that's the only thing we're trying to do, that would be wrong. But it's one of the things we want to do. As John Adams said, our Constitution was only made for a religious and moral people. It is inadequate to govern any other. In other words, if the people govern themselves because they have the Holy Spirit, they have the moral law written on their hearts, you're going to need less government. You're still going to need some, but you're going to need less government. If people are not restraining themselves because they're not following the Lord, you're going to get the nanny state, which is what we're getting here in America. We've got more laws than you can shake a stick at. I mean, on just about everything. So I would agree with the guy saying, well, government's not our only way of ensuring we have a civilized society, but it certainly is one way. What I would disagree with him, he seems to be saying we ought not be involved at all. No, we have to be involved. Why shouldn't we be involved for all the reasons I just mentioned a few minutes ago?
Right.
And by the way, notice also when somebody says something like that, they are implying a moral standard from which they are arguing. By what moral or theological standard is this person that you mentioned arguing? Is he saying the Bible prevents us from getting involved in government? If that's what he says, he's not reading his Bible. I mean, just about every major character in both the Old Testament and the New Testaments are in some way influencing government to some degree. Is he saying that it's just his opinion that we ought not be doing this? Is he taking a misinterpretation of the separation of church and state doctrine? What moral position is he saying it's wrong for us to tell other people they are wrong for engaging in certain behavior in society? I mean,
right. And I think the comparison was made to the social gospel, which I want to comment on in just a moment. But when you think about Christians being salt and light in our culture, it's almost as if there's this narrative from more left-leaning evangelicals who would say, well, we want to be salt and light, but just not in everything. Like, we don't want to be salt and light politically. We don't want to be salt and light that might let our neighbors know that we're actually Christians, or that we actually have moral opinions on things. And the Bible actually speaks with great clarity on biblical marriage and what it means to be male and female. It's almost as if people have been persuaded to say, well, we don't want to be salt and light in that area. And as you so well and rightly point out, is it just atheists who are qualified to lead the country? Of course not. But I want to talk about the social gospel thing a lot, because that intersects with my work on progressive Christianity quite a bit, because that is one of the errors of progressive Christianity, is that it is a social gospel. The sin and redemption gospel is replaced with a social justice gospel. And this we saw really gain steam in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the liberal theologians were rejecting things like the inherent sinfulness of man. They were rejecting things like Jesus being the Son of God, the God incarnate. They were rejecting the Bible and the miracle stories recorded in the Bible as being actual events that happened. So they were reframing Christianity, but that's not going going to remain in a vacuum. If you take the gospel out, there will be something that will come and fill its place. And so for progressive Christianity and theological liberalism, that was the social gospel. But here's the thing, Frank, that's so ironic to me, is that the social gospel requires leftist politics. That's literally what it stands upon. The social gospel, by definition, if you are a leftist politically, it will lead you straight to the social gospel. Because what the social gospel does is it says we want government to take the responsibility to do all the things essentially that the church should be doing, right? The church should be taking care of our poor. We should be taking care and be salt and light in the culture, not handing that over to the government, because as you rightly pointed out, the Bible's very clear about the role of government, which is to praise those who do good and restrain and punish those who do evil. That's in the New Testament in several places. It's the government's responsibility to bear the sword, and that it has to do with enacting justice on moral sins. And so leftist politics go hand in hand with the social gospel, whereas let's even say you start with conservative politics. That's going to be less dependent. That's going to lead you to have less dependence on the government, more personal responsibility, which is going to lead you toward more biblical values, which is why I think Charlie saw politics as an on-ramp to the gospel. And as Pastor Rob McCoy so beautifully said at the memorial, Charlie wanted to get people swimming in the streams of liberty so that it would lead them to its source. So to compare what the Bible talks about us being salt and light in the culture and saying to culture, no, you can't kill unborn babies who can't speak for themselves. They can't speak for themselves, so we will speak for them. We will stand between you and evil. And if we have influence in our government, which the way that our government is set up in this country, we do, then we are going to use that to say, no, we are going to do everything in our power to stand up for the unborn. We're going to do everything in our power to keep people who are mentally ill from mutilating our children and doing irreversible damage on their bodies. I'm just so tired of this comparison, saying that Christians being Christians in our culture is somehow comparable to the social gospel. Now, with that said, I'm compassionate to the idea that we could get those things confused. Certainly, any Christian who thinks that ultimately politics is our grand savior would be wrong. They've got their priorities out of order. And that's what I think Charlie modeled well. He was demonized and people believed lies about him, but he was Jesus first. He was gospel first. And like he told you, politics is peanuts. So I think it's ridiculous, this whole idea that to be politically active as a conservative Christian means you're peddling the social gospel.
Well, here's the ironic thing about the whole thing, or the contradictory aspect to this, is that, well, let me just tell you that the day before Charlie was murdered, we were in a session where he asked me to go through some of his previous college events and, critique some of his answers. And he had this one guy got up to the microphone claiming Charlie was a Christian nationalist. And so I said, Charlie, what should be your first question? And he said, what do you mean by Christian nationalist?
Yeah.
Exactly. So he was really starting to get,
Yeah.
he was like, this is a breakthrough now. It's like the Greg Kokel Colombo tactic. Your first question is, what do you mean by that? So what do you mean by Christian nationalism? Can you explain that to me? Because whenever somebody claims that you're a Christian nationalist, I want their definition. What do you mean by that? You could also say, well, even if you want to put a title on me, Christian nationalism, it's certainly better than secular internationalism, which is what we've had recently. We don't have borders open, right? And what's our standard? Just whatever we say. There's no transcendent standard. Anyway, Charlie turned the tables on this guy in this question, and he said to him, well, what do you think ought to be imposed? Because this guy's claiming, well, you're just imposing the Bible. And you know what the guy said? He said, the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. Sermon on the Mount.
We're going to be plucking out eyes and cutting off hands. And
yeah, well, no, but I said, Charlie, my question back to him would be this. Why is it that when you think I want to impose certain aspects of the Bible on people, moral aspects, I'm a Christian nationalist. But when you want to impose certain moral aspects on people from the Bible, somehow you're just right. He wants to impose the Sermon on the Mount, whatever that means. Okay. He didn't get into details, but I would ask him, what do you mean by that? Because if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, actually, the Sermon on the Mount is dealing with personal behavior. Turn the other cheek, for example. Okay. Does turn the other cheek apply to governments? Are governments supposed to take this guy that murdered Charlie and turn the other cheek and not met out justice? No, that would be contradictory to Romans 13. This is what people confuse. They confuse commands to individuals with commands to government. And that's what the people on the left confuse. They think they've inverted the biblical commands. The biblical commands to individuals, they want the government to carry out, and the biblical commands to government, they ignore. Okay? So they'll say, well, we got to take care of the poor. Where does it say the government should take care of the poor in the Bible? It doesn't. It tells Israelites individually, okay, leave the corners of the fields for the poor, right? So they leave the corners of the fields for the poor. But notice it's not a handout. Why? Because the poor still have to go harvest that. They still got to go work to get it, right? But it's not saying that the government ought to be taking care of the poor. Now, we can argue over that as Christians. We could say, well, maybe that we ought to have a safety net. Okay, we can argue over that. But don't tell me the Bible necessarily commands that. You know what the Bible does command the government to do? Justice.
Yep.
That's what the government should do. It should punish wrongdoers according to not only Genesis 9, but Romans 13, to protect innocent people from evil. Well, these are the same people that are saying that, well, we got to leave the borders open, and if people are illegal, you just have to overlook that. And if an American murders somebody or traffics drugs or sex traffickers, we would immediately be rightfully prosecuted for that. But if it's an illegal immigrant, somehow we're supposed to look the other way.
Right.
And it seems like the left has this exactly backwards. They, and on the clear issues, this was so clear during COVID, right? People like Russell Moore and David French and others would kind of think abortion is a nuanced issue. Marriage is a nuanced issue. In fact, of course, David French came out for same-sex marriage, and he's supposed to be a Christian, right? But somehow vaccines, the Bible speaks clearly on it. And if you don't get a vaccine, you're not loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
In other words,
that was a huge message from a lot of those kind of third way, big evangelical platforms. Yeah.
They take the debatable issues and make them biblically crystal clear, even though they're not. And they take the biblically crystal clear issues and suddenly they're murky and we can disagree over that. They flip everything.
Yeah.
By the way, if the government is supposed to do everything in the Bible, should the government be preaching the gospel?
Wow.
I mean, do the leftists, do they want us to make disciples of all nations? Is that what they're claiming? Because if so, I'll be with them. But General MacArthur, who was like Charlie's favorite hero, tried to evangelize Japan. He named his son after MacArthur.
Wow.
Mac. Because MacArthur wanted to he wanted missionaries. He told Truman, I need missionaries over here in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we do want to bring the gospel everywhere. And is the government commanded? The government's not commanded to do that. But if you're going to say every command in the Bible is a command for government, hey, let's go.
I love the unapologetic stance for pro-life that 7 Weeks Coffee takes. In fact, that's baked into their name. At 7 weeks, the baby in the womb is the size of a coffee bean. And this is when a heartbeat is first detected on an ultrasound. And this is exactly why they donate 10% of every sale to support pregnancy care centers across the country. In fact, they've helped fund pregnancy centers across all 50 states, providing life-saving ultrasounds, resources for moms in need, and real hope for families. And it all started with a simple idea. Just use your morning coffee to stand for life. Now, let me tell you about the coffee because I'm very picky about what I put into my body. It's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, low acid, and it's organically farmed. It just checks all the boxes. So if you go to 7weekscoffee.com today, you'll save 15% forever when you subscribe. Plus, you're going to get a free gift. Plus, exclusively for my listeners, you can use the code Alisa for an extra 10% off your first order. So that's a 25% 5% total savings on your first order, plus your free gift. Remember, your order will directly help support a network of over 1,000 pro-life organizations across the country. 7weekscoffee.com. Use my code Alisa. Right. That's a good point. And, there's a lot of scripture twisting with that as well. And what's so interesting to me, Frank, is that a few years ago, I was having to interact with the ideas of progressive Christianity that was saying things like, bringing up Old Testament passages about the sojourner and the exile and not exile, but the sojourner and the foreigner, and applying that, saying, well, we should have open borders because of that. And now we're having to answer even people within the broader evangelical sphere on those. Like, some of those twisted progressive interpretations have come in. And what's so fascinating to me about that is that, yes, in the Old Testament, the Bible speaks very positively of foreigners and be kind to foreigners and these kinds of things. But the law was very clear that when, like, Israelites were not to oppress or abuse the foreigner. Sojourners were to be allowed to participate even in sacrifices and feasts and there was a big if they were willing to follow the law God gave Israel. So even by their own example that they're using, yes, there was a way to include people into the people of Israel, but they had to assimilate. They had to obey God's law. They couldn't just bring their pagan laws in that were immoral, and then Israel go, oh, okay, well, let's just all try to get along with all of these other. No, it was like, even in the Old Testament, the verses that they often use, they were required to obey God's law if they were going to be brought in. And it's just, that isn't often brought about. But you brought up.
Let me mention one other thing about that, because Wayne Grudem has done the deep dive on this, as well as, I want to say, James Hoffmeyer, who is an Old Testament scholar, that the Old Testament distinguished between a legal immigrant and an illegal immigrant.
That's right.
Yeah, there's a distinction. I can't remember the exact Hebrew words used, but there was a distinction. And nowhere in the Bible does it say that a nation should not have borders. In fact, there was a wall around Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
Moses was told he couldn't go through Edom at one point, or Moab, one of those two countries. You needed to respect borders. The land promised to Israel had certain borders. The tribes of Israel had certain borders. There were always borders. And the idea that there are no borders would prevent us from having a reasonably effective government, because other than Jesus coming back and setting up, say, a millennial kingdom where he can rule quite easily because he's Jesus, we have to restrict ourselves to smaller areas in order to have a government that is actually effective. If we were to open borders and have a one world government, it would be a complete disaster, because you can't govern people on that scale. You need smaller segments. Of course, the same thing happened in Exodus 18 when Jethro, I believe, told Moses, man, you can't govern all these people. You need a bunch of judges to come around, wise people that can hear their disputes and take this load off you. You don't have the capacity to govern all these people. So this idea that we have no borders is not biblical at all.
I heard Allie Beth Stuckey say in a talk that everywhere the Bible talks about borders, it speaks of them positively. And because I am just an endless fact checker, I was like, I want to look that up. I mean, I believe her, but of course I had no reason to doubt her. But I was like, I want to see that for myself. And I did. I looked up gates, borders, walls, anything that would serve to keep something in and something out is 100% of the time talked about as positively in the Bible, as something that is good, something that is virtuous, and something that leads to human flourishing and protection and all of those good things. So
we create our own borders. When people say, I'm not for borders, I say, do you have a lock on your door?
Exactly.
Do you have a password on your bank account? How about on your iPhone? You've got borders everywhere. You set up, that if you were to just open your door and let anybody in, it would destroy your home. And it's not because you hate people on the outside of your border. It's because you love the people inside of your border. You don't hate people outside. You just know you have a responsibility to take care of the people inside your home, inside your town, inside your country. You have a responsibility. And if everybody took that responsibility seriously, we'd have a much less of a need for immigration. Why does everybody want to come here? Because it's the greatest country in the world. Imagine if every place was like America. Would we need? Would there be such a need for people to want to come here? No. So this this whole thing is completely misplaced. It may sound good. It may sound like you're virtue signaling to say, oh, we want people to come here. We do want people to come here, but we want them to come here who are going to contribute to society, not tear it down.
Yeah. Well, you've been such a clear voice on that, and you've really helped shape my thinking about that, especially over the past. You and Natasha both are so good at talking about the intersection between faith and politics, and I've learned a lot from you guys, and I love those thoughts. And frankly, this is the truth, is that if you start talking about politics from a biblical perspective, I'm just telling my audience, get used to being called a Christian nationalist. It's going to happen. They're going to call you that. Just remember,
the first question should be,
what
do you
does
mean
by
by Christian nationalist?
And that's the thing, Frank, is it's kind of like the word deconstruction. There's 100 different definitions. I mean, there was a news lady that came on, I can't remember who it was, but she said, there are these Christians that want to enact policies that are from the Bible. And I'm going,
thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder.
Yeah.
We can't have laws against those things, can we?
Right. And I'm like, and so if that's Christian nationalism, well, okay. And then, it can run the spectrum all the way to people who actually call themselves Christian nationalists, who want to abolish the Constitution, who want to enact Old Testament. And we're not for that. And neither was Charlie. Charlie was a staunch constitutionalist. He was not a Christian nationalist. So it's really just become kind of that boogeyman. There is a real version of it that I'm concerned about. But for the most part, 95% of the time, when people are using that phrase, all they mean is that you're a Christian who's engaged politically and you have conservative values. That's essentially what that means. So sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Remember when you were a kid and you were taught to say that? Like, we need to get back to that.
Yeah, so they're saying, hey, you Christian, you better stay out of politics so my influence will be greater.
Exactly. That's
exactly
really what it is. And I think Christians just need to wake up.
Be much greater. So yeah, we want to dissuade anybody that agrees with you from voting, so our votes count more. Yeah. That's basically what's going on here.
Well, it's no secret from listening to this podcast that Frank and I both love what Brave Books is doing. So as a parent, I'm always asking, what is shaping my kids' hearts and minds? Let's face it, a lot of the content out there today is confusing or shallow, completely opposed to a biblical worldview. And this is why we love what Brave is doing. It's a Christian children's entertainment company that helps parents raise kids with character, conviction, and imagination. And I can't recommend enough that you get this subscription to these children's books that will help your kids learn how to have character, integrity in their life. They'll learn about what it means to be responsible and to be honest. And that's why they've partnered with voices like Kirk Cameron and Frank Turek to give content that avoids overstimulation, promotes positive behavior, and reinforces biblical truth. So go to bravebooks.com/Childers for 20% off your order. Again, that's bravebooks.com/Childers, because what your kids watch and read really matters. There is nothing more political than progressive Christianity. Make no mistake, nothing more political. In fact, progressive Christians begin with their politics. Their theological views flow downstream from their political views. I will never forget when all of these progressive Christians were calling conservative Christians Christian nationalists while they were having Kamala Harris come do campaign speeches on Sunday morning in their churches. Like, don't talk to me about Christian nationalism anymore. But, okay, I want to talk about this book because I'm very excited about this, Frank. We love Brave Books here on the show. They're great partners of our ministry. They're one of our sponsors. I tell all of my young parents that have young kids about Brave Books because I think that as a parent, there's a time once in a while, even Brave Plus with the streaming platform, where you want to just take 30 minutes, maybe distract your kids with something while you get something done. And there's just not a lot out there that's not going to give them a short attention span, that's not going to just poison their minds with Marxism and all of the things that have infiltrated so many things. This is why we love Brave Books, why we talk about them here. But you have a book through Brave Books called Milo's Mission. Tell us about Milo's Mission.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Look
right there.
Look at that. I love the artwork is so good.
Well, the folks at Brave Books, I didn't do any of that, trust me, but
you didn't.
They've got some great artwork, as you can see. And my grandkids, I have grandkids now, they love these books because first of all, they're beautifully illustrated. Secondly, they give a fun kind of adventure story, and there's always a biblical lesson that is communicated. This one happens to communicate responsibility. You have to be responsible in the little things before you're going to be trusted to be responsible with the big things. So, kids, clean your room before you decide you're going to want the car keys, for example.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
When you become a teenager. But these books are written probably for kids, I'd say between the ages of 2 and 10.
Yeah, if somebody is not watching on YouTube, but you're just listening on the audio platforms, this is like one of those books that have pictures and just a little bit of words.
Mhm.
And Frank, I'm really excited to see you be a part of this. And is this part of a series of
It is.
virtue
There's a
books?
series of books like this that have come out that what happens is when you go to bravebooks.com and you sign up, you'll get one of these a month. You'll get this one for free.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and you get one of these a month. They're automatically mailed to you. And so you'll get the entire series. I don't know how many are in the series. There's a few dozen, I think. And so every month, your kid will get a new book. And of course, they're transferable. You have more kids, okay? They're going to come along and want to read these things too. The other thing that I love about what they're doing is they've created some Christian programming. They have a kind of an online channel that you can put your kid on, that they're, as you say, they're not going to get any leftist theology. I mean, Sesame Street has gone woke.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, like, there's a show they have called, it's with Kirk Cameron. It's
Iggy and Mr. Kirk?
Mr. Kirk.
Yeah,
Iggy
yeah.
and Mr. Kirk, right? So it's a puppet show, but Kirk Cameron's on it. And I love it because they have this character who's a vulture, and his name is Culture.
The Culture Vulture.
Yeah, Culture the Vulture.
I love that.
The vulture is always trying to talk the kids out of doing what's right. He's the kind of the devil in the story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then the other characters and Kirk Cameron bring the kids back to reality and truth. So if they sign up, it's like $6 a month or something. By the way, I don't get any money for this. I'm just telling you what's out there.
Yeah.
If they sign up, there's that program and about 60 other programs. So if they go to bravebooks.com, they might want to sign up for this streaming service. In fact, I think if they go to bravebooks.com/Frank, they'll probably see it all. Let me go there myself.
Well, and I have to say, too, that I have a special link with Brave as well, Frank, and that's bravebooks.com/Alisa or Childers.
Oh.
Yeah, we got to promote that one on this one because they're a sponsor.
Okay.
But so go to that one. But this is so great because you have, and I just love, all my sponsors are just amazing, and their products are products that I recommend in my real life. Even if they weren't sponsors, I'd be saying, go get this stuff. But I love this, Frank, because when I was a new mom, I remember there in our Tennessee area, there's this free book club that people can sign up for. But sometimes you'd get a book and you'd be like, I don't want to read this to my kid. Some of them were good, but others were like, I don't know. This isn't exactly promoting the kind of values that I want to promote to my kids. So what a great alternative. Like any grandparents that are listening to us or watching us right now, this is a great gift for your sons and daughters to get a book every month that's going to highlight biblical values. And Frank, another reason I'm really excited about this, because when I was growing up, I went to a wonderful little Christian grade school. And in our school library, there were all sorts of books. And if I'm remembering right, I think you had to check out one of the virtue books, or there was a virtue of the month, like a character trait of the month that we had to study. So we had to read books about honesty, bravery, responsibility. And every month we were focused on that one character trait. And Frank, I do wonder if more than anything else, that plus the Bible memorization that I had to do as an elementary student, the virtue and that was some of the most formative things in my life, teaching me how to be a person that reflects the image and character of Christ. Now, fast forward, there's been a big push in the past like 20 years to get away from the character trait and virtue because people are like afraid that we're just teaching moralism, and we ought not just teach moralism. Obviously, Christianity isn't just being a good person. You can't be a good enough person to earn your salvation, but I wonder if we didn't overcorrect and then be almost afraid to say, hey, kids, responsibility is a virtue. You should be responsible. You should be courageous and brave. You should be honest. I mean, in my house, Frank, I mean, my parents didn't do a ton of spanking. I don't remember getting spanked like all the time, but lying, my mom called those alligator spankings. If you lied, if you were dishonest, that was the worst thing that you could do, and you'd get an alligator spanking for. And I'm grateful. I think that's so good because it taught me. I don't know. I never got one because I was like a kid that I really valued truth. I think I've always been that way. I've always been like, if I fudged the truth at all, my conscience would just be it was so sensitive to that. So I don't know if she just was saying that to be like promote or just to get across the idea that that's the worst kind of spanking you can get is the kind you'll get for lying. But it really put deep in my soul. Like I remember even as a young adult working in a chiropractor office, and a man wanted me to lie on the slip so that he could just take the rest of the day off of work. And I was like, I'm so sorry, I can't do that. And he couldn't believe I wouldn't do that. And I said, well, I always learned as a kid, if I'll lie for you, I'll lie to you. So I can't lie for you.
Wow, that's good.
He wasn't happy. But I know it's because of the education I got with books like Milo's Mission.
Yeah, and the streaming service is $6.99 a month. It's called Brave Plus. They'll see it if they go to bravebooks.com/Frank or probably /Alisa too. They'll probably see
/Childers is mine, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and like they have the shows like Iggy and Mr. Kirk, Bob the Builder, Paddington Bear, Red Fern Grows, American Gravy, Strawberry Shortcake. I mean, there's like 60 of these different shows that are not woke, and they're not overly stimulated either, where your kids are,
right. And that's another thing, Sesame Street, for all the good that it did for a long time, it really kind of facilitated that short attention span where kids get used to the frames changing and all of that kind of fast-moving thing, whereas the Mr. Rogers model was more just very slow-moving, and I like that they're conscientious of that as well. So, yeah, definitely everybody go to bravebooks.com/Childers. You'll get a discount also. I believe you get 20% off of your first purchase if you go to that link. Frank, as we close out here, anything else that you want to say? I do want to ask my audience to be praying for you because I know that God has kind of put you right front and center at the front line of this thing, and all eyes are on you right now. I was so thrilled to see that your podcast has been in the top 5 of all religion podcasts. There are a lot of religion podcasts out there. And so I'm so thrilled to see some real biblical truth being brought into that top 5. There's a couple other good ones in there as well, but all eyes are on you. So everybody pray for Frank, pray for his stamina, pray for his wife, Stephanie, who is wonderful as well. Frank, any kind of thoughts you want to leave us with as we close out today?
Yeah, well, one thing that happened at the memorial that kind of struck me, think about how amazing God created our minds, that you could be up speaking to 100 million people and you're thinking about other things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you notice that? Like right now when I'm talking to you, I could be thinking about other things.
Yeah.
When I got up there and I knew there was going to be 100 million people watching, I looked out in the crowd and I saw Senator Ted Cruz sitting there. I don't know why. I just happened to looked over there. There he was. And I thought to myself, as I'm speaking, why am I speaking and he's not? He's a senator. And the reason I was speaking and he wasn't is because Charlie was all about Jesus first. Right?
Yeah.
And he and I were friends, and I was there and I was trying to mentor him. And as I said, it can be hard to mentor somebody that's smarter than you, but not Charlie, because the only thing that surpassed his intellect was his humility. The few things that I knew that he didn't know, he wanted to know. And the whole memorial service was one big worship service. It wasn't a big political rally, although, Trump was going to give his political speech at the end. But And by the way, about 20% of the people left.
I noticed that. I mean, it seemed like even more than 20% to me. Because it was kind of like people just weren't there for that.
Yeah, they weren't there for the political rally. I mean, we've talked about how important politics is, but not now. Okay, let's stay on Jesus. And when you saw what Erica did, when you saw that she said, this young man is who Charlie was trying to reach, and I forgive him because that's what Christ would have done. That's what Christ did do. That's what Charlie would have done. And there's no sense in her holding a grudge, being bitter about it, right? If Christ can forgive her, then she can forgive him. And as I said before, forgiveness doesn't mean that there aren't consequences.
Right.
I hope this young man becomes a Christian and then he's executed, because he should be executed, because we need to demonstrate the value of the innocent life he took.
Yeah.
And that's biblical. That's Romans 13. That's also Genesis 9, that if you take a life, your life should be taken because human life is so important. And if we were to just say, oh, it's no big deal, we wouldn't be demonstrating the value of human life.
Right. And I think that the reason people were confused about that, people seem to be confused about how Erica could say, I forgive that young man, and yet people be praising that and still be saying we need there to be justice. The reason they didn't understand that is because they don't have a biblical view of politics. So there's the personal responsibility of the Christian to be willing to forgive someone who wrongs them, but it's the obligation of the government to wield the sword. And those things are not in contradiction. They work together.
Well, it's also the reason that Jesus couldn't just forgive us without any penalty.
Right.
The Father couldn't forgive us. There has to still be a penalty for sin. Otherwise, God is not infinitely just. People say, well, why can't God just forgive us? Because then he wouldn't be infinitely just. Yeah, he's infinitely loving. He wants to forgive us, but he can't just say, oh, I forgive you without somebody paying the price. Because if he does that, then he no longer remains infinitely just. And this is why Paul says in Romans 3:26 that God remains just and is the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So someone has to be punished. Otherwise, justice isn't done. The government's role is justice. Erica's role is forgiveness. So Erica forgives, and the government metes out justice. If it doesn't do that, it's not demonstrating the value of human life. It's not demonstrating the value of Charlie. And it sends a terrible signal to the rest of society that you can kill people and nothing's going to happen to you. In fact, Charlie was with Alex McFarland, my friend here in South Carolina, just 3 weeks before he was killed. And he said, if somebody were to murder me, they in effect have murdered themselves, because they deserve what they get. Or he said, if someone were to murder me or Alex, they would have in effect killed themselves. So I say all that to try and clear up some confusion about what people think about forgiveness. But secondly, thank you for praying, because I felt the prayers. I don't know, there are, as you know, grief comes in waves. There are times when you're just like, I can't go on. And then there's other times you're going, I feel almost normal, right?
Sure.
And then when you start feeling almost normal, you almost feel guilty, like I should feel worse, right? It's kind of a weird phenomenon. But the people to pray for the most are Erica and the TPUSA team, people that were even much closer to Charlie than I was. I mean, they dealt with him every day, right? I dealt with him every day via text, but I mean, they were with him every day.
Yeah.
And he was their leader and their friend. And
right.
Pray for him.
Yeah, and I'll just make a comment too that I just want my audience to hear this. I'm back on X, everybody. So Alisa underscore Childers. I have been very convicted to get in the fight a little more. So I've been fighting. I've been doing a lot of hopefully charitable fighting on Twitter these last few days. But one of the things that I kept seeing was a lot of people were sort of criticizing Erica for being on the Charlie Kirk podcast when she came a few days ago, I think, and was just kind of giving an update on what's going to be happening with TPUSA and all of that. And there's this screenshot of her smiling, and people are just dunking on her, like, oh, this isn't the way a widow would react if her husband was just killed. And so I put this on Twitter, and I just want to say this here for my audience as well. Friends, we as Christians do not grieve like the world grieves. First of all, Erica is very obviously a very strong woman. She knows where her husband is. She can rejoice in that. And like you said, Frank, grief comes in waves. You're not going to be crying 24/7. And a strong woman like Erica, I can fully see how she could go on a show and have the joy of the Lord about her because she knows where her husband is. She knows what this has kicked off. She can rejoice in even grieving her husband, but rejoicing in the fruit that this has produced with so many Christians rising up with courage. And I wrote on X, I wonder if the people who are dunking on her for this have never actually grieved a loved one, because after my dad died, a whole bunch of us showed up at the funeral home with my mom to help her make burial decisions, casket decisions, all that stuff. And we, Frank, could not stop laughing. Every little thing was cracking us up. And I was kind of embarrassed. And I looked at the funeral director and I said, I'm so sorry. Is this normal? And she said, oh yeah, people laugh hysterically in this room. She said, in this room, people either laugh hysterically, they cry, or they fight. She said, those are the three things we see very regularly in this room. So their grief looks different on everybody, but I just wanted to put my voice in there to defend her, that not only should you not be dunking on her for smiling on a podcast, but you should recognize that she's actually being a beautiful Christian example of joy and knowing that death is not the end. And we do not grieve like the world. Like, we grieve with hope. And that's what she's doing. She's grieving with hope.
That's First Thessalonians 4.
That's right. Frank,
Absolutely.
I want to give you the opportunity to speak to pastors who might be watching us today.
Yeah, well, pastors, now is the time while hearts are tender to preach the gospel with conviction and to address every issue out there. I would ask you, what issue in your life or your congregation's life should Jesus not reign over? Every issue, whether it's political or not, you need to speak to every issue. Are you going to lose some people? Oh, you might. But you're going to gain a lot more because people are screaming. They're starving for people who are courageous, who are going to do what's right. And even if you don't gain a lot more, that's not the point. You're supposed to do what's right and leave the results to God. You're a pastor. You're not a facilitator. You're somebody that's supposed to shepherd people to the truth, and you're supposed to come alongside them and grieve with them and pray with them and teach them and guide them. And you can't do that if you don't address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't do that.
Amen.
So,
well, I want to thank my guest, Frank Turek, for joining. Go to crossexamined.org. Listen to his podcast, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. The book by that same name, by the way, is phenomenal. It's one of the things God used to save my faith almost 15 years ago. So let's remember, as we pursue Christ, to keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.